Roland. Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
So this title came out of a talk that I gave at the Washington Ethical Society this past summer as a way to nurture relationships between what is informally called the Chesapeake Group of Ethical Societies. Members from the Washington, Northern Virginia, and Baltimore societies gathered in the District of Columbia. And the leaders of those three organizations, myself, Joan Johnson Lewis from Northern Virginia, Amanda Poppy, and Mary Herman from Washington all spoke on the common theme of putting on our Sunday best. Now, we all played with this metaphor of dressing up in our Sunday go-to-meeting clothes in different ways, and I want to thank Nick and anyone else who did put on their Sunday best. Where are you, Nick? Here. How many have seen Nick in a tie? I just want to point this out. Thank you very much. I think that's pretty impressive. Now, what I'm interested in exploring today is how, for some people, putting on their Sunday best is a way to acknowledge that Sunday morning is a special part of their week. For some, they exhibit pride in their Sunday community, and it represents the values that they believe in. And it sometimes encourages them to put on a fancy go-to-meeting hat. You can see the pictures of Felix wearing one. I grew up associating the phrase, putting on your Sunday best, with proud and powerful women strutting their stuff up to their historically African-American churches in New Haven, Connecticut, that I would go out to see around Orange Street near where I lived. And this image was powerful to me, and it was powerful to a number of people, especially two young friends, a photographer and a journalist, Michael Cunningham and Craig Marbury. And this image inspired them to write a book that in turn inspired Regina Taylor to write a screenplay of the same name. It was called Crowns. I don't know if any of you have seen the book or the play. It's a loving homage to this cherished custom of fusing faith and fashion. Regina Taylor, who wrote the play, said she wasn't surprised that black women once denied the right even to enter some of the segregated fashion stores, started wearing fancy hats. These hats, these crowns that were adorned with bows and ribbons, said to the world, no more. No more am I going to hide. No more am I going to hide myself or my faith. This tradition obviously is set in the context of African American history in this country. And the power of these hats are wrapped up in the personal dignity of the wearers. And it's a dignity that flourishes despite centuries of racial dehumanization. And I think it's marvelous how this mixture of survival and strength and style carries such power. At least it does in my life. And it makes me think of the words of James Baldwin, who said, "Our crowns have already been bought and paid for. All we have to do is wear them." I remember thinking of that, and I remember thinking of it when I saw a Smithsonian exhibition produced by Gail Lowe on African American faith down in Washington, and she suggested that in pre-Civil War days, the black woman's church hat was worn primarily to honor God and respect the church. The photographer for the book Crowns, Craig Marbury, said that wearing a hat was part of an African American tradition of saying that when one presents oneself before God, you should be at your best. You should present excellence before the Almighty. Now, ethical humanists don't talk about presenting themselves or their excellence before an Almighty, but we do talk about presenting excellence for each other. We talk about bringing out the best in ourselves and bringing out the best in other people as ethical behavior or charitable deeds that we try to give to a wounded world. And that's what's most important to us. It's not about how we look, but rather how we act. Maybe deeds before duds? Does that work? Maybe not. But I want to point out that there is one ethical culturist who did make a show of her big fancy hats. How many people knew Rose Walker? Rose Walker was a member of the New York Society, and for years she wore these large hats that were her trademark. Last year, she died at 101 years old. At the AU Assembly, honoring the fact that her hats were as big as her heart, we took up a collection, and that collection was taken in 2 large straw hats and donated half of it to the Rose L. Walker Fund. But despite Rose Walker and the fact that we can call one of our own a good fashion displayer of hats, I'm not going to suggest we take up that tradition, because it's an appropriation. So bottom line, what is the position of your ethical culture leader regarding the role of fancy hats in religion? Well, to my skeptical mind, the odd juxtaposition of fancy headwear and the claims about a supernatural power in the universe seems a bit weird. What are we to make of this overlap of talk of an all-powerful force at the heart of theism and hats, chapeaux, sombreros, bonnets or berets, whatever? I'm going to go to the advice of one of my favorite social critics, who is George Carlin. So excuse the deleted expletives in the following rendition. Both excuse the deletions for those of you who think I should be true to him, but nevertheless. He says, what is this religious fascination with headwear? Every religion has a different effing hat. Did you ever notice that? The Hindus have a turban, the Sikhs have a tall white turban, the Jews have a yarmulke, the Muslims have a keffiyeh, the bishops have a pointy hat some days, a round hat on other days, the cardinals have a red hat, the Pope has a white hat. Everyone has a different effing hat. One group takes them off, the other group puts them on. Carlin concludes, personally, I would never want to be a member of any group where you either have to wear a hat or you can't wear a hat. I think all religions should have one rule and one rule only. Hats optional. That's all you really need to run a good religion. So, repeat after me. Hats optional. Very good. Well, it does take more than that rule to run a good religion. It takes hard work. It takes a sense of humor, I believe. And it takes the ability to respect other traditions and faiths that are different from us, even if we don't understand their traditions or faiths or their dress. So let's not get too wrapped up into critiquing the customs of other religious groups, because our job is to look at the deeds of these groups. And certainly in ethical culture, hats are optional, ties are optional, collared shirts are optional. And that's because our skeptical, free-thinking tradition, along with our deep celebration of the uniqueness of every person, demands that of us. But it is up to us to explain to other people unfamiliar with ethical culture how this lack of hats or other amenities on the outside shouldn't be confused with a lack of passion about our ideals. And in fact, it's precisely the lack of passion, the lack of these amenities that reminds us in many ways that our passion is with our ideals. It's, we don't have a lot of fancy bells and whistles dressing up our faith, but we are passionate about our beliefs. So we don't have elaborate rituals. We do have rituals. Don't pretend we don't. Some people say that rituals is anything done more than once. But we have our rituals, but they're not elaborate. We don't have clerical garb, so I wear a suit. I don't think I would feel very comfortable in a clerical garb, except on Halloween. I don't think you would feel very comfortable with me wearing a clerical garb. I don't have a lot of equipment or signs of power and prestige, and that's the way it should be in ethical culture. When it's asked of ethical culture leaders not to set themselves apart or be different or distinct from members, what is asked of them, however, is to offer some words of inspiration. And that's not always easy, because inspiration does not always come easily. When I was going into ethical culture leadership training, in fact, I was asked by a mentor of mine whether I had the passion for the work. Because he said, if you don't, you won't succeed. He quoted Felix Adler, who said, the platform of ethical society, in other words, the program on Sunday morning, the platform is itself the altar, and the address must be the fire that burns thereon. So, when some ethical culturists hear that language, they don't feel comfortable because it's too traditionally religious in their mind. Because we don't have an altar, we don't pray at it, we don't sacrifice animals on it. Right? So using any metaphor that links us to traditional faiths can make some people uncomfortable, and it provokes many discussions within ethical humanism. Some say we need to get rid of all of these superficial religious elements, and others say we have to celebrate them, but in our own unique humanist ways. Some find our little rituals too reminiscent of the traditions they reject, and others say that they want the rhythm, and the ritual that feeds a part of them that's not fed by their daily work routines or their endless home chores. So I wrestled with this when I chose the term Sunday best for the topic title, because it reminds some people too much of church ladies. So within humanism, this long discussion of the role of traditional elements to mark special occasions, whether they're life passages, memorial services, or our regular weekly meetings, came up in a discussion this summer up in Albany among the leaders when we watched a video of a man called Alain de Botton, who recently has been talking about atheism 2.0. Some of you know about this. He advocates the same thing, actually, that Greg Epstein, the humanist clergy up at Harvard, advocates, and that is incorporating more religious elements, more sense of connection with tradition in the past. Something more is what they talk about. Now, de Botton, speaking from an atheist position, which is different than speaking from an ethical humanist position, suggests that we adopt some of the tradition, for example, of repeating messages in ethical culture talks. Of repeating messages in ethical culture talks. He also says that we should take up the idea of a liturgical calendar, which celebrates different times of the year. He also says we should take advantage of music more often, right? He says we should do all of these things to do more than just have an intellectual conversation, which is so prevalent in humanism. Well, ethical culture has been doing that for decades and decades. We have been weaving these elements together. This has been the focus of Richard Kanary's work all of his life, to establish the religious identity of ethical humanism. When some of our ethical culture leaders at this last meeting I was just at in New Jersey spoke about how many of their members say, we want more of this. We want more of this sense of being inspired by ritual or music or art to act on a day-to-day basis more closely to my ideals. They're looking for this. They say, deed before creed, yes, but also creed, and also music, and also ritual, and also art. Because they need that. But they also want to be at a place where people who don't need that get equal time and are respected. Because, remember, in ethical culture, hats, optional. Hats, optional. Now, there are certain secularists. August Brunson is the head of the Student Secular Alliance out in Ohio, and he is an example of an individual who doesn't need ritual or traditional religious elements. And in fact, he wrote a column about how when he went up to Harvard about a couple of years ago, there was a humanist meeting there, and he was turned off by the religious tone of their events there. Greg Epstein did a humanist benediction and things like that. And he said that it's dangerous to include ritualistic elements because it can lead to a persuasion and a manipulation of other people. He writes, inasmuch as our religious borrowing displaces rational and evidence-based arguments as tools for persuasion, it is dangerous. What we share is a dedication to the intellectual dignity of all people. At every step, we need spaces, communities, and forums in which people are free to understand the world based on the best arguments and evidence. We become hypocrites when we use peer pressure, authority, opulence, or any other persuasive tactics that are not actually linked to the truth of that which we are trying to persuade a person. We need to remember that with religion, quite often the medium is the message. Well, I agree with a lot of what Brunson is saying, that humanists should be justifiably wary of mediums that distort reality or manipulate. But a very rationalistic guy, Fred Edwards, who used to be head of the American Humanist Association, offers a more scientific and sympathetic interpretation of the role of religious ritual and things. He says, the dispositions to undergo and undertake and participate in religions and other rituals are simply expressions of our collaborative character, which often requires symbolic images through which to dramatize our collaborativeness. So in order to feel together, we wrap ourselves in ritual and music and dress because it helps us feel collectively together. Now, ethical culture, as I said, is uniquely situated in the middle of this debate because we have inherited these paradoxical elements. We embrace a tradition of rationalism, individualism, and free thought, while at the same time explicitly being congregational. This congregational aspect often pull ethical culture towards ritual, and it's this paradoxical combination of elements that are our strength, but we have to think about them carefully. We have to make room for both parts of our heritage, each embraced or not, in different degrees by all of you. Some of you are on one part of the spectrum, and some in the middle, and some on the other. So my challenge, both today and in general, is making room for those who want to make Sunday time that they put on their Sunday best, and those who don't. Okay? I'm challenged to inspire those wanting inspiration, maybe traditional religious elements, and some who do not. Making room for both of those. And I love this challenge. And I love this diversity. And I love that hats are optional. So, to me, what's more important, however, than all of this debate is this bottom line. How do we make our Sunday mornings important, special, representing our highest values, and different than the mundane moments of our life? All right, I'm going to turn to another high authority, Miss Manners. Miss Manners, I know you all read her and obey her to the law. She appreciates the importance of making sometimes special by marking them off. She says, the concept of Sunday best, so popular in previous generations, has become distasteful to modern people who pride themselves on stylistic consistency. She continues, nevertheless, Miss Manners, who is never afraid to take on an unpopular stand when it's all for the best, would like to make a plea for reinstitution of Sunday best. One ethical culture role model I try to emulate a little bit, who actually did advocate an inclusion of traditionally religious elements along with Deep Before Creed, is Algernon Black. Now, Algernon Black, who was the leader of the New York Society for years, is greatly known for his work in social justice campaigns. But he wrote a book called Without Burnt Offerings, where he talks about the importance of ritual and invocation in ethical culture. He says, I began to realize that through ceremonies, humanism could help people face difficulty and crisis. Ceremonies could be a part of the spirit of humanism. They could offer a way of celebrating life that could be creative and loving, which could nourish their inner life, the inner life of human beings, with dignity, honesty, and beauty. They might help people live with greater meaning and courage. Near the end of the conclusion of this book, he says that the purpose of ceremony and invocation in ethical culture is, quote, he says, there is no effort to invoke magic or miracle from powers outside of man, but rather to stress human responsibility for the quality of life we want to have and lead. They are an effort to stimulate consciousness of self, consciousness of the unity of community, and a commitment to struggle for a better life. So, do Sunday mornings here at Rittenhouse Square do that for you? If they don't, how could they? How could it be a more deeply meaningful experience for you? Maybe you could put on a fancy hat. I choose to dress up just because this is what I want to say. I want to say this is a special time of my life, a special moment of my week. When I first started thinking about this, I remember conversations I had with my wife, because outward appearances we had a very different opinion of. Maureen is a great dresser. She knows how to dress and accessorize with style for any occasion. She's never overdone or sloppy. And while I always thought she looked good, it was just a few years ago that I realized that this was really her artistic expression. She would talk about doubts about how she could draw and paint. She was never confident what she could put down on paper, but she was a fashion artist. Her closet was her artist's palette. She could mix and match things until they worked just right. Accessories were like notes in a song, perfectly pitched and placed in harmony with the whole. While I might express myself by writing or by singing a song with a guitar, Maureen lets her creative spirit bloom in how she dresses every day. And all types of artistic expression can greatly affect one's mood. Because I find music the most effective way to tap into my emotions. When I play a song, especially if it's a particularly poignant or angst-filled song like my favorite artist Ryan Adams always does, I find my feelings are pulled through my head and my heart in powerful ways. And it makes me feel great. Like many other fashion-aware individuals, Maureen feels great when she looks great. You can put on a happy face by putting on good clothes, if that's the sort of person you are. Hello, Dolly. Carol Channing belts out, put on your Sunday clothes when you feel down and out, strut down the street and have your picture took. Dressed like a dream, your spirit seem to turn about. That Sunday shine, a certain sign that you feel as fine as you look. Get out your feathers, your patent leathers, your beads and buckles and bows. There's no blue Monday in your Sunday clothes. Dressed like a dream, your spirits seem to turn about. That Sunday shine is a certain sign that you feel as fine as you look. Maureen loves musicals too, so. But looking good helps her mood. And it's more about, it's not just feeling good, it's about creativity and expression, passion and art. And all of that can feed you in a way that you can live a more meaningful and connected life with other people. The fact that it took me a couple of decades to figure this out about my wife is not a sign of any problem in our relationship. We just celebrated 30 years of a supporting relationship. It's more my slow learning curve is due to the fact that when it comes to fashion, really, I'm generally clueless. Like some other men, I tremor at what I think are some of the most frightening words a husband can ever hear. Notice anything different, dear? When the heart starts to pump, adrenaline, sweat, I start looking around, what is it? Is it, the earrings, whatever, new hair, I don't know. And I blurt out something, hoping to get lucky. Nice necklace! And then she'll give me one of those, those disappointed, disapproving, but not altogether unsurprised look. You gave me that 3 years ago. And I know you might be thinking, but Hugh, how can you be so clueless about fashion when you always look so good? Well, this is a recent phenomenon. I got a lot of help from Maureen and other people because left to my own devices, I can be a slob. I mean, until I started working on Sundays, in fact, Sundays were the particular day that I took great pride about wearing my pajamas till halftime of the first NFL game. And I grew up in a secular household. When I went out into the street and I saw these church ladies going to the church down the street, I was not in the practice of dressing up on Sunday. I also didn't feel comfortable wearing a suit. And when I began teaching in an alternative progressive school, my dress of choice was a t-shirt and sneakers. Occasionally I would try to match, but it was the political slogan on my t-shirt with my historical lesson for the day. Other than that, I just grabbed what was on the top of my pile. But once Maureen and I started to go to the Washington Ethical Society, she suggested that maybe I do something different than what I wear in my weekday routine. Maybe a collared shirt, maybe khakis instead of jeans, Hugh. And I resisted at first. But as for me, the meaning of going to the Ethical Society deepened, I began, miraculously, to want to wear something a little different. Maybe a collared shirt, maybe even ironing. So I did this. And then after I gave my first ethical culture address, I decided that whenever I spoke, whether speaking as a platform speaker or presiding, I would wear a jacket and tie and usually a suit. Now, maybe I've made some people uncomfortable. I want to know whether any of you maybe have been looking around, checking out each other, comparing how we look on the outside. Stop it. Stop it. This is not about comparisons. We celebrate the uniqueness of the individual, and I'm going to defend that to my last day in ethical culture. This is, and I repeat, this is not a slide towards general convention or towards a dress code. Because remember, hats optional. Northern Westchester Ethical Society has on their website advice to stop the potential of a slippery slope towards dressing up. On their website they say, we are a laid-back community, so dress is casual. You will see mostly jeans and slacks. Okay. Well, that makes me stop for a second and say, well, I think I'm laid back. Does this suit make me seem uptight? Good, good. I hope not. But like my wife, many people like dressing up, and fashion can be fun. So I celebrate anybody's desire to dress up. But I also know that dressing up can be destructive. How many people were teased in their school days for wearing something dumb? And now you read about people shooting each other over expensive shoes. And you look at red carpet dresses that are worn in Hollywood that cost more than what it would keep a family of 4 to be alive for a year. So you got to be careful with dress. There's a lot wrapped up in that. It doesn't have to be about a lot of money either. My son Justin is very good at our local thrift store and comes home styling. And today's talk isn't really about clothes, obviously. It's not really about putting on your best. It's about bringing out your best. So, I say this clearly again. Come as yourself. Come dressed as you feel most comfortably. But come to our community gathering seeking something important for you. Something important for your life. Some of you come because what's important is that this is your community. This is where you meet your friends and your associates. Other people come here because they look for the intellectual engagement and challenge. And some people come here to connect with social justice and ethical action projects. And many come for all three. But I hope that on top of that, coming to Rittenhouse Square on Sunday morning is also about trying to declare to the world our shared values. I hope we feel proud coming together to say we care about the worth of every individual. We care about the relationships we build, and we care about social justice in the world. I hope we embrace these with our head, our heart, and our hands. I hope it changes how you think, you feel, and you act, whether you dress up or not. What's not optional is caring how we treat each other. Every day, but in my opinion, particularly on Sunday. You may feel differently, but for me, Sunday morning is the time where I remind myself most to bring out the best that I have, interpersonally. It's when I remind myself to be most open, caring, compassionate, attentive, thoughtful. Is it the same for you? Could it be? Does coming here help you live closer to your values? Do you take a deeper breath when you come here and feel grateful for all that you have and all that you have to give? Do you appreciate this time as a moment in the week to recharge your batteries and to be kind to yourself? Is it for you, perhaps in a non-theistic use of the term, what many of those women that I saw as a child told me? She said, "It's a blessed day." Is it a special day for you, whether you wear a big hat or not? I think it's important for all of us to nurture in our own way some of what wearing that hat represents. Pride, joy, power in being yourself, in honoring your ideals, and declaring it to the world. Ethical culture needs to stop hiding its faith. I think we should have a little bit more hatitude. Yeah, Maureen told me not to say that. This isn't easy on the surface for many in ethical culture because our heritage is more sedate than showy. Felix Adler's personality, our founder, was certainly more austere than ostentatious. In our rationalist tradition, one which I think we should honor, celebrate, and build on, has sometimes been defined a little too narrowly, I believe. And I think it keeps ethical culture in the background of society and the humanist landscape. So, metaphorically, I urge those of you who like to wear fancy hats to do it in whatever way. And we do it more all throughout the ethical culture movement. There's more music, there's more celebration, there's more color, more poetry, more fun. We're doing better at using all of ourselves to make a difference in the world. And because of volunteers like Betsy and others, we're getting that message out to the world more and more. So don't come to Sunday morning just as routine. Don't let it become mundane to you. Try imagine wearing a fancy hat, because wearing that hat takes commitment. And so does coming here and trying to make it meaningful for yourself. Felix Adler did not wear a fancy hat on his bald little scalp. But in his own ways, he did strut his stuff. He spoke with flair and passion and proclaimed the ideals of ethical culture to the world. He spoke with eloquence and energy and treated each platform as the fire that burns on the altar of ethical culture. He proclaimed his faith in living ethically. Let's do our same in our own way. Dress on the outside as you see fit, but let's bring our ideals to our action. Let's be proud to share with the world what we believe is an ethical way to live. And remember, hats off. Thank you very much.